May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Viruses, it must be said, viruses aren't much in favour at the moment. An unwashed knife, a dropped bottle perhaps, somewhere out in the Far East, and within a couple of months, from Alaska to Zanzibar, from Zimbabwe to Australia, the whole world is wearing face masks. A century ago, Spanish flu rampaged through the world, killing countless millions of people. Well, much has been learned about viruses since then. Each of us has discovered a lot too. We know about R numbers, about mutations and variants, the distinction between aerosols and droplets, and asymptomatic transmission. Whilst it may be a little while before we start keeping viruses as pets, perhaps we got a bit better at living with them than we were. If that's so, we've certainly taken our time, because viruses were around long before we were. It's only recently we've come to hear how important a role viruses play in evolution. I was taught at school, perhaps you were too, that natural selection was mostly to do with random mutations, environment, predators. But now it seems that from the very start, it's viruses that have been the main driver of evolution. Without them, there might have been no evolution at all, and there would have been, by way of life on this planet, perhaps just one massive, undifferentiated wodge of something like seaweed or lichen, subsisting on air, water, sunlight, and being no fun to anyone at all. Perhaps this very diversity we've got is one reason to be grateful for viruses. And after all, perhaps they're not as bad for the human race as they're painted. What happened to the Spanish flu, for instance? Did it just disappear, get tired, die out? Well, the answer is that it's still here, all around us, but it's become much less lethal. And this is important. It's obeyed a rule that we see also in more homely life forms. If badgers could climb trees, if foxes could fly, if cats could swim, they'd be much more efficient at dealing with birds and small mammals. And once they'd taken a year or two to clear all those out, they'd die of hunger themselves. Evolution brings a balance between prey and predator, and it's the same with the virus. They need us to survive. When I was at school, I remember being taught that natural selection was a matter of competition, survival of the fittest, a ruthless pushing of rivals out of the way to ensure one's own survival. Well, there's still a lot of truth in that, of course, for human beings, as well as any other life form. But it's not the whole story. There's also a strange kind of cooperation. Darwin himself wrote, "A tribe, including many members who are always ready to give aid to each other and to sacrifice themselves for the common good, would be victorious over most other tribes." And this would be natural selection too. That's what Darwin wrote. So virus is becoming less lethal. It's part of the same process as what applies to us and what we find in this morning's gospel. It's normally reckoned that Darwin and God aren't obvious bedfellows, which was a matter of some distress to the writer of The Origin of Species. But that insight of Darwin's tallies entirely with what Jesus says this morning. Take up your cross, deny self, be willing to sacrifice your own interests for the sake of others. That is indeed how a harmonious tribe would ensure its survival. But Jesus gives two more twists to this. First, as far as he's concerned, it's not just your own family or tribe. For Jesus, the one for whom you're prepared to forego your own advantage might be someone you didn't even know. Think of the parable of the Good Samaritan and how shocking that was to his contemporaries, that anyone should be willing to confer advantage on someone who wasn't one of one's own. But the second point is perhaps even more radical. Taking up your cross meant acting as if you'd already been convicted of a criminal offence. Once you're carrying your cross, you have to take it through to the bitter end. No chance of mitigation or hope of mercy. There was only one possible outcome. But more importantly, perhaps, there was now nothing to lose, time to go for broke. Jesus was speaking, of course, when he said this to his disciples. The message was addressed to them. And one by one, they accepted it. They took his message to heart and followed it through to the inevitable outcome. The testimony of the early church wasn't the words people spoke or the good deeds they did, but their deaths. In our age, that kind of sacrifice is unlikely to be called for. But for us, as for them, our duty as Christians remains non-negotiable. A great community of believers throughout the world, the overwhelming majority of whom we shall never know. That is our highest priority in life. Loving our neighbours, whoever they are, as ourselves, welcoming the stranger, caring for the poor, feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless, tempering justice with compassion, looking after the world. By doing all that, we're doing God's work on earth. Now that's the responsibility we accepted when we committed ourselves to the faith. Testing times are on the way. As a nation, we may be in for a bumpy ride. This is the first time I've heard the word trillion mentioned in relation to the national debt. Although we know very well that a lot of people around us have been quietly despairing during these times of lockdown, also there have been many who've been spending a lot less and seeing their assets coming along quite nicely. Whichever category we find ourselves in, we're not going to remain untouched by this. What should we be doing? The least we can do is support the food bank. More than that, will realistically have to be done centrally by the government. If a time is coming for gritting of teeth and biting of lips, maybe we need to copy out this morning's gospel and use it as a fridge magnet to put it where we will see it, and not resent it too much when we're called upon to do our bit, whether it's helping reduce the national debt or helping to grow the economy, one or the other. That may be the good that's eventually coming out of this wretched pandemic. That's us as part of a nation, but as a local church community, well, the thing to do now is simply to register that it's time to get back to work. It's time to get back to work. The new normal will involve having a new look at our responsibilities and taking them on afresh. Mothering Sunday's coming up, then Easter. We'll need to reforge our links to a community that's experienced an epidemic of loneliness and anxiety, to a school where the staff have been overstretched, children and parents frazzled. And all this while we're taking this back on board, perhaps none of us is feeling quite ourselves. I hope you've been listening to the hymns I've put online. The last one today is Stand Up for Jesus. Lift high the royal banner. Put on the gospel armour, the trumpet call obey. Where duty calls or danger, be never wanting there. The time has come.